Greetings, comrades! I've been planning to make a video about how Russia and Russians are portrayed in Western films for a long time. But the reason I finally decided to do it is quite paradoxical. The fact is that for many years Hollywood showed Russia and the USSR as Western audiences wanted to see them. Distant, cold, backward, with a bunch of misconceptions and stereotypes, not to mention the ever-present grey-blue filter. Need an enemy for your perfect hero. Make him Russian, it never fails. Then 2022 happened, and it's clear that the world's attitude towards Russians hasn't suddenly improved. One would expect this trend to intensify. Yet, at the beginning of 2026, I constantly see and read accusations that Hollywood loves Russia too much. Films and TV shows featuring Russian characters are being released, Russian is being spoken in interviews and on TV, and last year an Oscar was won by a film about the son of a Russian oligarch starring Russian actors. What happened? Could it be that instead of demonizing Russians, America has begun to promote them? Let's figure it out. As you can imagine, I may be a bit biased since I'm from Russia. Perhaps that's also why I see more news about Russia in Western cinema on my Twitter feed, Reddit and news sites than you do. Obviously, Western countries release thousands of films and TV series every year, and Russia is mentioned or featured in only a few dozen of them. Yet, every time it happens, it seems to provoke a minor scandal, like this, or even this, although Wednesday was definitely not filmed in Russia, and the family's last name is Adams, not Adamov. After everything Russia has done in recent years, how dare they cast Russian actors, speak Russian, set the film in Moscow, and use music by Russian composers. Russia, Russians, Russian culture and the Russian language should be left behind, ignored and not given a platform. Let's leave the moral side of the issue to Twitter warriors, woke and anti-woke activists. We are interested in one thing: how Hollywood and other Western film studios portrayed Russia and Russians in the past and what has changed in recent years. Has anything changed? The most important word to describe the relationship between Hollywood and Russia or the USSR is Klyukva. This term started at the turn of the 20th century as a joke mocking foreigners' ridiculous ideas about Russia. It originated from a parody of a French work in which the main character walked around Moscow, sous l'ombre d'un Klyukva majestueux, under the shade of a majestic cranberry tree. If you've never seen a cranberry tree before, here it is: majestic and sprawling. This expression gained popularity and came to describe all the absurd and stereotypical ideas foreigners usually have about Russia. Vodka, bears, fur hats, balalaikas, matryoshka dolls, all men are called Boris, all women are called Natasha, you know what I mean. In fact, every nation and social group has a similar Klyukva. For example, that all Jews wear hats and sidelocks, black people listen to rap and play basketball, British people eat porridge for breakfast and drink tea by the fireplace at 5 o'clock sharp, or that all Chinese people know Kung Fu and revere their teacher more than their own mother. That is, there is some truth in all this, but it's so cliched and boring. So, in Western cinema about Russia, these clichés and stereotypes have always been present in one form or another. Starting with the 1930s and the German film about Rasputin, the demon of women, and culminating in everyone's favorite Ivan Drago from Rocky IV. The Russian flavor has captivated the imaginations of directors and screenwriters ever since Hollywood began to flourish. And from the very beginning, anti-communist propaganda was woven into this flavor as a response to the red menace that everyone feared so much at the time. For example, in the 1939 comedy Ninotchka, 3 Soviet people live in a corridor of a communal apartment and each brings an egg to a dinner party. This changed for a few years in the 1940s. Movies like Days of Glory, The Boy from Stalingrad, Mission to Moscow portrayed the Soviet Union as an intriguing country inhabited by courageous and charming individuals. The reason was obvious: the US and the USSR were now suddenly allies, and this alliance was hard to explain to the public who were accustomed to viewing the Soviet country in an extremely negative light. Fortunately for the public, everything quickly returned to normal after the war. The USSR became the enemy again, and directors of overly pro-Soviet films faced many tough questions. Lewis Milestone, director of North Star, which depicts the Ukrainian partisans' resistance to the Germans, even had to temporarily flee the US after talks with the House Un-American Activities Committee. The hint was not lost on other filmmakers. The post-war portrayal of the Soviet Union in Western cinema was not uniform, but the dominant theme was depicting Russia as a constant threat, both militarily and economically. The Soviet Union was portrayed as a place populated by spies, military personnel, and generals, all preparing for World War III and hoping to steal secret information from the West. The James Bond franchise is where you find most of these stereotypes. Russians show up in almost every movie. Only 3 Bond films don't have direct references to Russia or Russian characters. Almost all Russian characters are spies or military folks. Women, femme fatale, but also spies and military personnel. They all speak English with a noticeable Slavic accent, and when talking about Russia they primarily mention the cold weather and vodka, borscht and the political system, tsars, aristocrats and mass repressions. However, even in the cold 1960s there were films that criticized this anti-Soviet spy mania. For example, The Russians Are Coming, where the crew of a stranded Soviet submarine befriends the residents of a remote American village. Or, of course, Dr. Strangelove, where not only Russians, but pretty much everyone is portrayed as idiots. Progress. The demonization of the USSR gradually subsided by the 1970s, or at least became less intense. Historical films began to be made, including adaptations of Russian classics such as War and Peace, The Brothers Karamazov, and The Seagull. While these films were not without their inaccuracies, they at least did not convey the message that Russians are evil from the first minute to the last. In the 1970s, movies about contemporary events emerged with Russians as the main characters. Even if they were immigrants, as in The Deer Hunter, which won 5 Oscars. The main characters weren't even cartoonish villains. Unfortunately, the Vietnamese ended up being the cartoonish villains, causing an international scandal. But even the gradual decrease in the level of viciousness and cartoonishness of the Russian characters somehow did not prevent the constant increase in the level of Klyukva-ness. Okay, Red Dawn was clearly anti-Soviet, so the viciousness and cartoonishness of the antagonist here at least looks organic. But then again, the famous Red Hit contains positive Russian characters. Yet, why is it so hard to hold back laughter at the absurdity and stereotypical nature of some of the dialogues?
How do you Soviets deal with all the tension and stress? Vodka.
Okay, the Soviet Union collapsed, the Cold War ended. Russia has changed, so cinema must have changed too, right? Not quite. Stereotypes created over many years cannot disappear overnight. New archetypes have simply been added. The omnipotent Russian mafia and wealthy Russian oligarchs have joined the ranks of the bears, furheads and secret services. They now take turns playing the main villain in films. Sometimes it's a crazy Russian rebel, sometimes a malicious Russian oligarch, or a powerful Russian crime boss. And so on and so forth. I mean, it's logical. Make the villain Chinese and you lose $1 billion market. Make him Arab and you're accused of Islamophobia. A Russian is the perfect safe white enemy, one whom no one feels sorry for. Even if a Russian doesn't appear in a leading role, he's always associated with crime, the secret services or both. Sure, we had Natasha Romanoff or the drunk cosmonaut from Armageddon, but even when Russians are good guys, there is no escaping the stereotypes. It's always winter in Russia, everyone in Russia is sad, half of the population is in prison and the other half guards them. If you've escaped this fate, then you are probably a mega spy, an oligarch or his bodyguard. Even if you are a cosmonaut and a good guy, you are still an alcoholic idiot. Even in TV series like Chernobyl, where everything is reproduced quite meticulously and whose creator admitted in an interview that he was familiar with the concept of Klyukva and tried to avoid stereotypes, we see academics living in shabby Khrushchevkas and soldiers guzzling vodka for breakfast, lunch and dinner. Let me remind you that Gorbachev's dry law was in effect at the time of Chernobyl. In general, by 2022, even when the authors had no intention of disparaging Russia, they portrayed it in a very specific way, as a strange and distant place. This has been the historic norm. Russian in movies are spies, mafia members and supervillains, and Russia is cold, unstable and dangerous. As you can imagine, no one would ever accuse Hollywood of promoting Russia, so it's all the more surprising to read these accusations now. Have shows and films portraying Russia and Russians positively really started appearing en masse on screen in recent years? Not even distant historical Russians like Catherine the Great or immigrants from Downton Abbey, but modern Russians? How dare they? But is that really the case? Let's take a look at all the films and TV series about Russia and Russians that have caused scandals and assess how much they whitewash Mother Russia versus how much they depict her in a negative light. What have we seen since 2022? Note that when I say Hollywood, I am not just talking about the US, I am also talking about British and Canadian series, for example. Anything made by the West. First, there was the movie Tetris, in which the game's creator Alexei Pajitnov was played by a Russian actor. However, the portrayal of the USSR is far from positive, ending with cries that the country will fall apart. This is hardly propaganda. ISS from 2024, it's literally a nuclear war. Good Russian versus bad state. French Compromat? Yes, the action takes place in Siberia, following the genre's best traditions. The Secret Service are the main enemies, and all Russian heroes are connected to them in one way or another. Surely you can't count Netflix's House of Dynamite, in which the Russian foreign minister claims that neither Russia nor China launched a nuclear missile at the US, as normalization of Russia. It's not even clear whether we should believe him. Maybe the situation is different in TV series. Okay, there's the British series A Gentleman in Moscow, but the only references to Russia are the Metropole Hotel and the evil Bolsheviks. Jack Ryan, the Russians' insidious plan to restore the USSR. Treason, the Russian spy villainess. The Diplomat, formally not all Russians are totally evil here. But all this is accompanied by a set of clichés from Novichok to the Kremlin's money laundering in London, and a fat hint at the Wagner PMC. The culmination of this is the British comedy series Mandy. In one episode we get Sergei, a fan of Salisbury spies who is so caricaturely stupid that it's not even funny. History has come full circle. Now, movies based on overused formulas are in the same place as 1950 films depicting Russian characters as homogeneous agents of a hostile state, without any nuances. Against this backdrop, any film or series in which Russians are not portrayed as absolutely evil is perceived as scandalous. And there are only 2 or 3 such films out of dozens. Idiotka hasn't even been released to the general public yet, but there's already a storm brewing on the internet, even though the only thing Russian about it is the main character's last name. Take Anora, for example. You can't even say that the Russians are portrayed positively there. Oligarchs? Definitely not. Their son is a spineless wimp. Okay, what about Yura Borisov's character? But he's completely stereotypical, a petty thug working for the Russian mafia. And even then, some critics accused Sean Baker of making the character not stereotypical enough. They gave him too much moral depth. Humanization of the enemy, you know. Ultimately, the main complaint against Anora was the abundance of Russian speech on screen, in a film where the main characters are Russian, and the casting of Russian actors Mark Edelstein and Yura Borisov in the roles of surprise Russians. These actors also dared not to speak unequivocally about the war. I wonder why. This means they are dirty propagandists, and their nominations for various awards are a way of art washing, providing a platform for Russian actors and normalizing Russia, returning it to the peaceful world agenda. Take The Ponies, which came out just a couple of weeks ago. It's a straight-up Klyukva. Enemies in the form of the KGB, 1970s Moscow filmed in Budapest, broken Russian and crazy dialogue, where behind every peaceful Russian grandmother hides a cunning fraudster who cheats everyone.
Ксюка, дай сюда эти чертови яйца.
Two things. A wife of an American diplomat in Soviet Moscow would never go to a local market to buy eggs. And B, for such a phrase, Emilia Clarke character would have to run for a long time from an angry crowd down the street. You can't talk to babushkas like that. But even here, internet users saw a romanticization of the Soviet Union. Emilia Clarke is being cancelled for admitting that she studied Russian to be more authentic. If she swears in Russian, it's not cultural appropriation or Kremlin soft power. At most, it's a meme for a week. But the most ridiculous complaint I've seen is about the Canadian series Hated Rivalry. You see, the thing is, I'm not even sure I can say directly what it's about because Russian laws on LGBT propaganda are so strict. It's about the deep friendship between two hockey players. The whole basis of the complaint about the series is that one of these friends is Russian. He was probably made Russian solely to emphasize the intensity of their rivalry with the Canadian, and to create some internal conflict in the plot. At the same time, it must be admitted that this series contains almost no banal stereotypes. The Russian hockey player is portrayed quite realistically, except for how calm he is about being outed and his refusal to take off his shoes in other people's homes. But how can this story possibly promote Russia? Someone will watch this series and say, oh, this Russian hockey player who is close friends with another hockey player is so cool. But he worries that he can't be so close to someone in public in Russia because they will be imprisoned for it. Yeah, Russia is a great country. And anyone who already holds conservative views will, surprise surprise, not even bother to watch such a series in the first place. In Russia, incidentally, it has also become a hit in certain circles and has been highly praised by viewers, although naturally it has not been officially released, while orthodox activists are, of course, demanding that it be banned. Think about it. This series is simultaneously condemned by Russian ultra-right conservatives for promoting strong friendship, and by Western ultra-left Twitter activists for featuring a Russian athlete as a hero while Russian athletes should be banned. Astonishing. Yes, the joke about Odessa probably doesn't sound very funny to Ukrainians, but it wasn't even said by an actor, but by a TV host. A valid reason for cancelling the show, no doubt about it. What's the bottom line? Does Hollywood normalize and whitewash Russia? Of course not. Despite sanctions, Russian themes have not disappeared, rather they have evolved into even more stereotypes. Against this backdrop, any film that deviates even slightly from these stereotypes seems strange. Wait, what do you have here? A Russian character who is a complex human being, not a one-dimensional parody of one. That can't be right. Cancel it. Honestly, I don't even mind if Russians are portrayed as antagonists, evil mafia members or secret service agents. If the audience likes it, then so be it. But please, please, do without the endless Klyukva, bears, balalaikas and the KGB. At least make it realistic. No matter how much some people might want it, Russian culture, the Russian language and Russian themes will not disappear from the world entirely. Russia is simply too big for that to happen. After all, you just watched an 18-minute video made by a Russian. Hollywood isn't normalizing Russia. But what about me? Subscribe, like and share before they cancel me. Thanks for watching, and as always, a huge shout out to my biggest supporters: Елизавета Zakharova, Kirill Klimuk, Petr Ilich, Lyudmila Ilyanova, and one more member who wished to remain anonymous. See you guys next time.